Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to be here today, and I'm grateful for the Social Action team, and I'm here with Reverend William Lamar, who I will introduce formally in a little bit. But Renee, could you put up the second slide for me? Because today's webinar is going to be interactive. So it's not going to just be y'all looking at us talk, but we are also going to allow you guys to participate. If you have a smartphone with you, you can scan that link that's right there. And also we're going to put a link in the chat as well that has this wonderful little program. Give me 1 second here as we multitask. Please share with us where you are coming from, where you are. And if you need the link, we will get that to you. You go to vivox.com. There you go. And if you need the link, this is it right here. Well, not the link, but the code. Where are you joining us from today? Let me see how many people are coming in here. And let's see here. So we have folks from DC, Lawrence, Kansas, Waldorf, Maryland, Tucson, Washington, DC, Alexandria, Sandy Hook, Connecticut, Austin, Texas. We got some more folks in here. Who else is here? Can y'all see the screen, the word cloud? I hope you can see it. Awesome. A lot of Washington, DC in there. Okay. Well, as we continue, this is just to warm you up. We're going to be asking a few questions using this technology right here. So I'll let you know when we're going to jump to this. Just trying to keep you guys engaged. And now I'm going to flip it back over. And I hope that worked okay. Amen. So again, my name is Reverend Moya Harris. I am the Racial Justice Director here at Sojourners. I'm also a preacher in the AME Church. I'm a retired registered nurse, so I wear a lot of hats. So today our focus is on early childhood development and how important it is for us to thrive as a society. So continue to put your things in the Q&A. I got it popping up over here, but I have another quiz that I'm going to launch. All right, so y'all look at the next question. Remind me not to multitask, okay? There you go. True or false? Black women are nearly 2 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related to causes compared to white women. Answer that, and we will see if you guys can do the true and false thing. So today we're going to talk about the problem. The problem is the Black maternal death rate and our Black infant death rate in the United States of America. You see on the screen, DC's Black maternal death rate compared to other countries is almost 60%. These are Black women. And 90% of the women in the District of Columbia who died during childbirth are Black women. And a lot of that is because it's on the other side of the river, the Anacostia River in DC. There's 2 rivers in DC. On the other side of the Anacostia, there's no health care for women, especially for high-risk Black women. The hospital shut down before the pandemic. Was it before the pandemic, Rev? But women are having to get on public transportation when they're in distress to get to a hospital to be able to get taken care of if they get there on time. We've heard stories about people who having to take taxis, which they can't afford, or get on the metro to get to a hospital. So before we engage in the theology, we want to talk about the science of early childhood development and why it's so important. As I said, I'm a nurse, I'm a minister, I'm a scholar. So my brain deals with all of this simultaneously. So before I get started, I want to make sure I officially introduce my pastor, my colleague, used to be my boss, Reverend William H. Lamar IV, who is a graduate of FAMU, Florida A&M. He is a proud graduate. He's a Rattler. And he is also a graduate of Duke Divinity School. And he's also a PhD student in the world's only African-American preaching and sacred rhetoric PhD program in the world, which I'm also in. We are classmates. So Rev is pastor of Metropolitan AME Church, which some would call the Cathedral of African Methodism. And I'm saying it just because it gets on his nerves when I say that. As you can see, we're going to have a conversation back and forth. I've worked with Rev for the past 9 years. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you. And it's a joy, Reverend Moya, to have all these wonderful people share time with us, because the older you get, the more you see the most valuable thing anyone can do is share time. So thank you all for being with us and looking forward to what you will contribute to the ongoing conversation.
Awesome, awesome. As we talk about the most vulnerable in our society, right? So before we talk about the theology, we're going to talk about the science of early childhood development. And believe it or not, the numbers are getting worse. We need to understand what the problem really is before we can talk about a contextual theological conversation, because if we don't understand context, we just talk in words. The US healthcare system has historically failed people of color, especially pregnant Black women and babies. The lives of babies and mothers have not been honored since we've been on this continent. Because of the multiple health, societal, economic factors contributing to this, and unequal access to maternal health is a big, big factor. Because if the mother is not healthy, the baby's not going to be healthy. These chronic inequities and unequal access to health care and quality care contribute to the higher rates of maternal and infant death and complications. So we're beginning with maternal health, because if your mother is not healthy, the one that's carrying the baby is not healthy, the baby has less chance of surviving. So you all put, true or false, Black women are nearly 2 times more likely to die from pregnancy related to causes compared to white women. Let's see what we got here. 100% of y'all said true. And that's supposed to say false. I don't know what happened to the E. It fell down, but the answer is false. Black women are nearly 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes compared to white women. Sit with that. 3 times. And it's not always economical, because we've heard of Serena Williams almost dying during childbirth with a doctor not listening to her when she had a pulmonary embolus, because she had them before. She knew her body. They didn't listen. She almost died. There was, oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it was a track star, found her pregnant, dead in her apartment. Those are people whose names are in the media. But as a Black woman myself who carried a child, my child had the cord around her neck. They call it late decels, when the heart rate slows down with contractions, the baby's not getting enough blood, they're in distress. And it took my best friend being in the room, making them pay attention to what was going on with me. I've had a niece, same exact weight as my daughter. She did not make it, cord around her neck, was stillborn. So I was a brand new registered nurse. They were not listening to me. Black woman, didn't matter. So Black women need people to advocate for them. And the church is a really good place to do that. Now, Rick, we have a member, she was, thank you, Tori Bowie, thank you, was the track star who passed away. We have a member that was a neonatologist who helped us to. We also have a lactation room in our church as well to help young mothers. So there's things we can do, and we can talk about that later. And there's more to come.
Could you say a little bit about, and we talked about this, I was in a larger discussion about this, and they talked about how when Black women were midwives prior to kind of the industrialization, my term, of medicine and the OBGYN practice, when Black women delivered mostly everyone's children, it was something we did, that all births were healthier and Black births were healthier, but with the industrialization and the kind of professionalization, they took not only an economic base away, but health as well. So you and I talked about that. I thought you might want.
Yeah, that's good stuff, because now you have the trust factor when the midwives, and see, that connects all the way to Exodus, right? So we can talk about the Exodus story and the midwives and their role with saving a whole people. And that's what, so now we have doulas that are out there to be these, we have doulas that sit with the women during the pregnancy, during the delivery, and afterwards, to make sure that the women are advocated for and they have somebody there for them. So those are the kind of things that the community can do, despite what the government is not doing to support Black women, Latino women, Indigenous women. It says here that Black women residing in the nation's capital are nearly 11 times more likely to die than white women in Nevada. 59.7 deaths versus 5.6 and 100,000 live births. 60% versus less than 6% in the same stinking country. I was trying really hard not to cuss. So yes. So this report said that pregnant women in the nation's capital during this time were over 4 times more likely to die during or after childbirth than women in Nevada. And also, let's look at the babies. Let's get to the babies, because this is early childhood development. The definition for the CDC, infant mortality is the death of an infant before his or her first birthday. And the infant mortality rate is the number of infant deaths for every 1,000 live births. So the number of deaths per 1,000 live births. The infant mortality rate in the United States rose in 2021 let me start that over again. The infant mortality rate went up for the first time in 2022 since 2001 and 2002. So let me just say that last year, the rate has gone up 3%. More babies are dying all of a sudden last year. And yes, we were in a pandemic. It went from 5.4 deaths to 5.6 deaths. That's concerning for public health scientists, because infant mortality tells us what the healthcare of all of society is. So if babies are dying, that means our whole healthcare system is failing everyone. So they're looking at this number, and that's how it all connects. If the babies die, how can we continue if our babies are not healthy? So can we get the next slide? So the importance of this, besides just living and making it through childbirth, early childhood development is critical, because this is the first 3 years of a baby's life is when the brain develops and when the body systems develop, and the growing and the muscles and everything that happens. That's the most important thing, happens those first 3 years. And this is a time of tremendous potential, but there's also this vulnerability. So if the baby is growing up in a toxic environment, that baby's brain is being affected for the rest of their life. If they are not thriving with healthy foods, if they're not in a place where there's love. Early experiences shape our developing brain. So like Rev, you grew up in the church, right? So your childhood was in the AME church, and you were basically, your ways of knowing, your whole epistemology was the Black church.
And what I have shared too, and this is based on some science I read, I was inculcated in the church, its rhythms, its spirituality, all of that in utero. So the whole time my mother was carrying me, I was going to church. And as we know, children in utero are listening, learning, understanding. So it's some prenatal, pre-advent, on the scene kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's spiritual. It's mystical. It's like we don't know what we are hearing. I mean, they always, read to the baby before they're born, play the music. I mean, you have the rhythms of the church in your soul. You can't help it. That's why you know all those hymns and the words, and you don't have to look in the hymnal. But then you can also, flow with some hip hop at the same time. Anyway, so if you want to experience this, you can go to Metropolitan AME. Is AME.org or AMEC.org?
It's AME.org. Yeah.
I always get that confused because the email is the C. So
Yep.
MetropolitanAME.org if you want to experience the fullness of the Black church tradition that encompasses no separation of sacred and secular. You will hear hymns, and then you might hear some Luther Vandross or some Earth, Wind, and Fire, and maybe even some Biggie Smalls. I don't know.
We have done that.
Yes, you have. Tupac, I don't know. Hey, it's all holy. So early experiences shape the brain. Early connections, relationships, the love, all that shapes who we are, and it helps babies become part of society in a way that is healthy. And if we don't see the way the world is right now, the way people are acting, it makes you wonder what the early childhood development was for some of these people, especially like in Congress and stuff, but I'm not going to go there. Anyway, this country is failing our young people. We see how in this pandemic we had the what do you call it, the childcare cliff, where they were supporting childcare and then they took it away after the pandemic is over with. We don't have universal leave for parents to be able to take care of sick children. Our society is not set up for this. So can we get the next slide? It says, being Black is not what causes these disparities. It's racism. This is not what's causing these numbers to be all just, it's a problem. So the next slide. So basically, early childhood development and maternal health is a social justice issue that affects all areas of society. So Red, what do you think about that?
Well, I think there's not a clearer statement to be made. I mean, if you think about the fact that if we do not preserve infants and really those who are growing before they are born with the kinds of medical care that makes possible healthy delivery for both mother and child, then you can't call a society just that will not protect the most vulnerable. And I think about, in the Advent season, Mary carrying Jesus and all the precarity around the many things that sought to snuff out his life, and how dreams and prayer and ancestral presence all came together to literally save his life. And that type of multiplicity of protections is very, very much still necessary to preserve the lives of children. And we're in a place where you mentioned the healthcare, and we don't even have universal child pre-K. We are not serious. We're only serious about children whose families can afford what every child should have by right. So I was at a meeting today, and they said that every time a child is murdered, well, every murder rather in DC costs $1 million. If your child is murdered, the city will give $6,000 to help bury your child. What if the $6,000 were leveraged in an economy of life versus an economy of death, where, like the scholar Sandy Darity says, you give each child when they're born a $6,000 baby bond and let that mature and grow. By the time they're 18, they can pay for college, they can start a business. So we still are fixated with death in a nation that claims that it's about life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. So I could go on and on, but it is it is entirely difficult to believe any of the political rhetoric of the United States when you look at these numbers.
Yeah, it's just really, it's the numbers, or it's the truth is in the numbers. If people truly cared, so that's you. That slide should have been earlier.
Yeah, pass that real quick. Get that off.
It's a social justice issue, though. And it's something that, as the church, the Black church, any church, we should be taking this seriously. And so, you know, we're scholars. And if we were in a class and we were talking about what the problem is, what is our answer to the problem? So on the screen right there, womanism. Mm-hmm. I would argue, if I was in class, I would argue that a womanist theological and ethical perspective can be a response to this. Almost cussed again. I've been bad lately. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm a preacher. I really am. But it makes me upset to hear, to see how our lives are not valued.
Well,
and yeah,
you know, one of the things when theologians began to press that context sits as a source for theological reflection. So when European men completely control the theological academy, when people said, wait a minute, you're doing theology from the context, from the perspective of a white man of a certain socioeconomic strata, certain experiences, you're not doing universal theology for the ages. It is bound by context. So what early womanists and others said is that contextualization is not problematic. Not only is it intellectually honest, but from within the context of being a Black woman, you can get at what is universal. So then you tie this together with Toni Morrison, who says, I don't have to write about white people to produce literature that explains the fullness of the human condition. So then it was reminding me of the beef, well, not the beef, but the Toni Morrison's challenge with Ralph Ellison. And she says of Ralph Ellison, an invisible man, invisible to whom? So her argument is that even the title sits us within white gaze, within the white gaze. And let me tell you, no matter who you may be watching, engaging, white, Black, queer, trans, you can do theological work, ethical work from your own perspective. What I love about womanism and early womanism, many of them were students of James Cone and said, wait a minute, you paid attention to everything but us. What is missing in your theology, and that's what, you know, Reverend Moya get to that, is the perspective of Black women. And I would argue if you let Black women give and guide the perspective, as Reverend Moya said, all humans are lifted, because they really are the ones who over time have, at expense to themselves. Who's a scholar that talks about surrogacy? The Black women have served as surrogates.
Dolores Williams.
Yeah. Dolores Williams, in dangerous ways. So to listen and learn from those who really have had to bear the brunt of the challenges of what it means to be human, it makes for a beautiful and compelling theology.
Yeah, because it's basically that whole surrogacy is like we carry the pain of humanity and are expected to produce life and carry life and maintain life. And so a womanist theological, a womanist worldview, if you go to the next slide, I think it's the beginning of it began in the early 1980s. The most prominent definition is from this is Walker womanism. There's other versions of womanism, as Africana womanism, and when I was taking my comprehensive exams, I would be able to say there's other versions of womanism. So we're looking at Walker womanism from Alice Walker, the definition coming from In Search of Our Mother's Garden. You gonna say something, Ram?
Oh, not at all. No, I just love the folk language. You're acting womanish, you're acting mannish.
Yeah.
Like that's what we grew up hearing. And to appropriate the folk wisdom. And the older I get, the more I see that those folk were much more right than a lot of the stuff that we studied formally. Just to fall into those ways of knowing can really set you free.
Yeah. Just that what do you call it? I can't even think of it, but that folk speak, it makes me think of the Zora Neale Hurston and the characteristics of Negro expression, and that we put stank on English that no one else can put it on. So
ornamentation is one of them. Ornamentation.
Yes, ornamentation, not stank.
Yeah,
yes.
Ornamentation. Same thing.
Same thing. Sorry. Thank you for translating that. Please. And in the second part of the definition is where I'm coming up with the argument. If you go to the next slide, it talks about loves women, loves other women, loves men, and then committed to survival and wholeness of entire people, male and female. That's where my argument lands, that this way of knowing can be a way that the church can embrace, support, advocate, mobilize, organize to support the most vulnerable in our communities. And go to the next slide. I love this part. Loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, loves the spirit, loves love and food and roundness, loves struggle, loves the folk, loves herself regardless. That part encompasses the whole fullness of loving community. In the next slide.
You know, Rev, one of the things that Busak says, he quotes a poet who pushed back. He talked about, I wish we were all like him, in that you continue to learn and you change your thought over time. There are things I was afraid to say and do 5 years ago. I'm no longer afraid. So he talked about how they used to sing a song during the anti-apartheid struggle, valorizing women as strong and all that. And I've had sisters to push back on me and say we don't need to always be strong. We have to be able to weep, to mourn, to be soft spaces. So this poet, I got to find her name, I'm missing it, but she just talks about that some Black women have died being burned, bleeding, having to struggle and awaken from nightmares. So it's such a beautiful opportunity to think, because everybody doesn't fit into that. All of the beauty of the human experience. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it really is. And you were talking about Alan Busak, the South African theologian, who wrote the book, which has guided some of our thought here, Children of the Waters of Mirabah, which has really, it's an amazing book. So we will put that in the chat also. Next slide, please. So womanist theology is a religious conceptual framework which reconsiders and revises the traditions, practices, scriptures, and biblical interpretation with a special lens to empower and liberate African-American women in America. And like you said, it was Fannie Lou Hamer says, ain't none of us free unless all of us are free. That's basically womanist theology. The hope is that if the most vulnerable in society becomes free, that means all of us is free. If you think of like the pedagogy of the oppressed, right? Ferrer says basically by liberating the oppressed, you're liberating the oppressor and the oppressed. It frees everyone. So next slide. So why, that's basically, I already asked that, why womanism in early childhood development? And if we haven't compelled y'all, we're gonna talk some more, but that's the crux of the matter. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, in the question and answer portion. I mean, Reverend Patterson, our colleague, is going to be manning the Q&A to let us know if you have any questions on what we've said and what we're getting ready to talk about. We're just having a conversation. And so what are your thoughts, like all of this, right? Like we're in a season of Advent, right? And I love the way that you approach Advent in the Christmas story, and how basically we have sanitized Christmas. So
oh my God. I mean, it is a story. I mean, so where I start with, and I'll just say it, I mean, Christmas doesn't smell like cookies or trees. It smells like shit.
I knew you were gonna.
It's a bar. I mean, we have taken and cleaned, and you have a precarious young girl, maybe 12, maybe 14, who is unmarried, on the run, giving birth. Rev, you are the nurse, not me, but to give birth in a bar, in a stable, I am. There's just, yeah.
It goes against everything that you know birth should be. And meanwhile, we sanitize it and everything is all white and snow and everything. Meanwhile, we have our Savior is being born next to some cow poop.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
and is on the run. So where we just have also, you should check this out. We have the tradition Posadas is a way of celebrating Advent from a Latin perspective, and it is talking about displacement. It looks at the displacement of the Holy Family, and they look at their own, especially immigrant families, migrant families, and it was, I was on the we had virtual Posadas was yesterday, and it's online if you want to experience. But next week we're going to also have in-person Posadas in DC. If you're going to be there, check out our website, and we're going to come together. And I think we're going to have tamales afterwards.
Could
But
you spell that, Rev? I'm not familiar. I need to look.
Osadas.
Ah.
And we're going to also be advocating, we're mobilizing and organizing. We're doing an action going up to Capitol Hill. But afterwards, we're going to have in-person posadas where we're going to actually have, it's going to be worship, and then we're going to have tamales at the office. So, but it makes me think about how people that are displaced, people whose backs are up against the wall, tend to look at the Advent story, should be looking at the Advent story differently than the colonized version. So it's like a post-colonialization of Advent, really.
Well, one of the things when we think, I got some good questions coming in, but the beauty hidden in the brokenness and bedevilment of the Christ child being born in a barn is that this is where the divine chooses. This is the site of the divine invasion into time and space, the divine disruption, the divine interference. So that means that wherever children are found at the place of precarity, then that is where God is. That is where we are, where we ought to be overturning the experiences that led to that. So to me, Christians get this all wrong. We should be running to the barns, getting mothers and children out.
Yeah.
Using what we have. And so now, Rev, you had to, I not have to, but I think this is a question that I'd love for you to take the lead on. Do womanists invite feminists into their fold? Do feminists invite womanists into their fold? How can they help each other? How do you?
That's a good question. Because womanism came about because Black women were left out of Black theology and also out of feminist theology. So, and then there's also Mujerista theology. So what happens is we're all sisters in that we look at the world through our own lenses. And I think that we can be in the same spaces, but also recognize there shouldn't be no hierarchy when we go into those spaces.
Right.
Because realizing that even in those feminist spaces, like Bell Hooks talks about how the way that she was dealt with in feminist spaces was problematic because our worldview, because what was missing from the feminist perspective was the class aspect. Because because womanism comes from a try something, three perspectives. My words are leaving me. And so, yes, we can all be in the same spaces. Because even if you look at James Cone, he admits that he overlooked it and hit with his students. And then he even tried to correct it, and he still didn't correct it, right? And then there was still, if you look at any of his books where he allows the critique of his students, there's a back and forth. We should be able to disagree, to agree, to disagree, have conversations in the same space, but also not approach it from a perspective where one perspective is considered the only right, authentic way.
I think this is where, so Busat talks a lot about empire, and we could go too deep into it, but one of the things that's important, Willie Jennings says this, that a mark of empire, a mark of imperial faith is the belief that it is always teacher and never student, and that it will refuse to be the student of certain people within its context. So let's be clear that those in Congress and even those in the Supreme Court, where there now is a Black woman, shudder to be taught from certain people. shudder to have their experiences lifted up, but rather than be erased. And so I love what Lauren says here. Jesus had adverse childhood experiences. See, the sanitation, Clorox, deodorification is one of the words I think that
Breathe.
of the Christmas story is a means for us to turn a blind eye to the challenges of those who still come into a world as funky as the one, as imperial, as bloodthirsty. So when you get to the Exodus stories of the midwives, they were saving children from imperially sanctioned genocide. And while America won't call it imperially sanctioned genocide, the refusal to grant health care to every student is frozen molasses genocide. It's still molasses. It moves more slowly than throwing children in the Nile, but you're still killing children. And what the church has to do is to stop lending our voice to slow murder, to slow genocide.
Slow murder. Wow. 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 We have a question here. As faith leaders, how can we be the innkeepers for young children and new parents? Like, how can we get them out the barn, right? I like that. You got to preach that, Rev.
How can we get them out of the barn?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, we love the barn. We build barns. I think so. For the first thing for me is I had to be willing to listen to people who told me I was in the barn. So here's the thing. I'm still forcing my way out of the barn. Every day I'm looking for people who will hold up a light like Harriet Tubman and say, we got to get out of here. We must get out of here. So the beginning is to know, and this is another thing, Rev, the kind of revolutionary way you put this together, it begins with reinterpreting texts and reinterpreting given theological concepts and beliefs and understanding that the way you were taught may not be the only way. And there is a reason that you were taught the way you were taught. And you got to interrogate the politics of interpretation in your little world of faith. Who determined that you read the Christmas story the way you read it? And how come people that have scratch and sniff Christmas cards that smell like what I said, which is what the story says, how come they sideline us and they do all the other stuff? I mean, Dana and I were talking about why Thanksgiving was placed where it is by Roosevelt, was he was pressed by capitalists so that the Christmas buying season would be extended. So all of this stuff is a collusion, and the spirit is trying to get us out. Ancestors trying to get us out.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's like rereading the text. Elsa Tamez, she's a Mujerista biblical scholar, Latina, basically says we need to reread and reinterpret these texts. And it's okay to reread and look at it through a lens that might not be the lens that you looked at the first time you heard the story. Because I know I don't look at things the same way I used to look at them. Like, you got to decolonize your mind, but also, what was it I sent you, that the text is, there's voices in the text of people crying that people are overlooking. They just want to be heard in the text. Like, I think about rhetoric, right? Where we're taught to look at who is speaking, who is not speaking, who is quiet because of oppression, who is quiet because it might be better for them to hold on to their power. They're quiet because they know stuff that that nobody else knows, but it helps them to keep money in their pocket. The text has the same thing. And I think we have to decolonize the way we read this text, because that's what's killing us, because we're seeing now, because of this theology that has that is killing people, is what's guiding how people are voting, how laws are. I mean, what is it? William Augustus Jones, what did he say? Our theology guides our anthropology, which informs our sociology.
Sociology, yeah.
Yes. So the way that we see God informs how we see other human beings, which informs how we shape policies and laws that keep babies from thriving.
Well, I like Reverend Brett Keen's question. What are the practical ways the church can create and educate low opportunity communities about Black maternal health when many churches focus on a come to us, come to our programs, fill our seats, transactional mentality?
Ah,
He's exactly right. And I think that we need to amplify. So I've been listened to and been a part of some of these Black maternal health conversations, trying to get the church to amplify the message, not just within the confines of the four walls,
that
but they've used social media. There's the way that Sojo now is using this webinar, podcasts to get the word out. And when we've been out in communities doing like the digital and broadband work that Metropolitan does, talking about these healthcare disparities and trying to make sure. One of the challenges, I can't remember, you were talking about Dr. Michael Young, who did that work. I can't remember, it was the number of OBGYNs in across the river was abysmal, right?
right.
And that is a recipe for maternal and infant death. It just is.
And they know that's what's going to happen.
Sure.
The numbers are not a surprise.
No.
So basically, their theology is a theology of death.
Yep.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And we can't run from that. And I think that what this shows is, again, the poetry of the narrative is what I think that we have done such a poor job reading texts, that if the fact that the Christmas story begins in a barn, we behave as if the Christmas story began in wherever Roman emperors and empresses gave birth to their children. The world is not reordered. This ought to reorder the world because of where God enters the world and the precarity. Now notice, we think of God as Superwoman, Superman, but God enters the world at every point. Jesus is being stalked by death.
Yeah.
At every point. And that's not something to valorize. That is something for us to read and then undo.
Mm-hmm. Comes as the most vulnerable thing, right? A vulnerable baby that can't do anything for himself. And basically, when we're treating these babies like this, we're treating Jesus like this, because that was Jesus.
Yes, bottom line.
Bottom line. And we can't forget about, even before Jesus was born, the single teenage mother. And how does the church treat single teenage mothers? And if we even treat these vulnerable folks in love and support them, I mean, I just think about people that have been sat down because they were pregnant in the church. We do that all the time. We do it all the time.
It's patriarchal, it's misogynist, because, you know, if the man on the other end is clergy, he continues to be able to have the authority to practice his vocation in the community.
Yeah, yeah. So we're the practicalness. So practicalness, that's not a word, but if you're working on a PhD, you can make up words all the time. That's what we do. We take stuff and make new stuff. Like the practicality of not keeping this inside the four walls. We have this misnomer that we're supposed to take care of our own and our own only, but we should be out in the street. And even if they're not members of the church, we still nurture whoever's in the community. Like our cradle roll, right? So in the AME church, is the cradle roll tradition is in our church school, on Sunday school. The cradle roll are the infants. They come to a class and they come together and we introduce them to Christian education. And they graduate from that and begin to the primary class. Our cradle roll in DC, is it still like the jump off right now?
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, and what I love about the people there is they're not asking you like you don't have to take a theological test. You know, if you are a child and your family members, whatever family looks like for you as an infant, they bring you to church, you're loved and people love it. It's a wonderful wonderful tradition that I inherited. I have nothing to do with it, but I'm very pleased because there are people I see and meet who talk about how their child was formed in that space. And it's a blessing. It really is.
You know, I had to think about this. When I first went to my first church, I became a Christian as a young adult, and my daughter was 4, and we went to church, and someone asked, "Does she like to sing? She want to be in the choir?" So she joined the Sunbeam Choir, and then she started. That's how we got into the life of the church. We got into the life of the church because somebody nurtured and wanted to bring my child in. That's how, and then 4 years later, I answered the call to ministry, which is crazy, right?
Mm.
Okay, I'm sorry. My husband says she was 5 when we joined the church. Thank you. Thank you, Brother Harris. I see you in Lord. See, this is an after dinner conversation. So it says here, where does education of the parents come into the picture? Could we register people for a library card when we register them to vote? Can every church have a free library, a little free library filled with parenting books so that we can know better what to ask for? Could churches have prenatal and preschool? I mean, yeah, and I agree. We can't wait on the government.
No.
Oh, look.
And we never did. We never did.
We never did. And so that's the beauty of the Black church as well, because the church school it taught us how to read, taught us how to speak in public, taught us Black history. So yes, the church can become that place in the neighborhood where we do the things that the government ain't doing for us, because that's what we had to do before segregation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, to get back to rereading of text, let me just be clear that it is terrifying to discover that the way you were taught to read texts can be problematic, if not problematic, downright oppressive and exploitative. But you do this in community. It was in community that I learned what it took to try to read texts differently and to be clear that I read with an eye toward liberation. So where the text is not liberative, I will not afford that the same weight in faith and practice, because everything in the text is not liberative. But I read it all because you can learn even from the other stuff how, as Jeremiah Wright and others have said, the text was written under oppression from one regime, one imperial reality to the next, from the Babylonians to the Romans, right?
Mm-hmm. From Genesis all the way to Revelation,
yep,
people are under siege. Yep. And the whole, even the context of which most of it was written was to remind the people of who they were.
Yep.
And where they came from. So there was another one. So I agree about the education and all of that. That is important, and hold a pin there, because we will be talking about different aspects of that in these future webinars. But my argument is, if we're putting band-aids on things and there's these systematic problems, part of what the church can also do is advocating and civic engagement, right? So what are we doing to fix the systems, the pharaohs that are out there? What subversive acts are we doing, like the midwives, having strategies to talk to empire, saying one thing but actually doing another, because they were basically signifying. Yeah. They were, oh, they're too strong, they're giving birth to these babies and they come so fast. Meanwhile, Pharaoh's like, man, what's going on? What can we do? How can we become churches that are advocates, who organize, who are civically engaged, looking at the laws that are local, state, and federal? Because we got this Momnibus Act that's out there that is out there to support mothers and children, that continues to not be voted for. So how do we put the pressure?
Well, I think the first thing, I spend a lot of time, and I'm thankful that it's a part of tradition and that Metropolitan affords me this space, that those of us who are in these communities as leaders alongside our lay folk in churches, that our goal is never to be in spaces with elected leaders and policymakers as chaplain. So what they want is they want for us to come in to say a prayer that does not disrupt the machinery of empire and death, and to tell them they're doing God's will. And I refuse to do it. The challenge is that you get labeled and uninvited or misunderstood, but without disrespecting those who are elected, because I think they're human beings and deserve respect. I will not come into the space and I will not speak from the talking points that they have distributed. And I think the challenge is the midwives show us, as womanists show us, that these are the persons you can trust. And as Busak says, Musa Dube and African biblical interpreters and others, how do you have the strength and courage to be present and to say what must be said, affirming life and affirming the life of the most vulnerable? And also we're talking about how early childhood development is a theological matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's medical, but it's theological. It's socio-political, but it is theological and ethical. You cannot tell me, as many of the people who make policy to keep us away from universal childhood, free education and the nutrition, how can you tell me you love Jesus when you refuse the material needs of human beings made in the image and likeness of the one who sent him? What we gotta do is stop saying, if your ethics don't line up with your confession, we ain't trying to hear it.
Yeah. It's just, it's not lining up.
No.
Yeah. So Rev, we have come to the end of our discussion. And man, we can probably do a part 2 of this, because I mean, there's so much. I mean, we didn't even get to the Exodus story like we wanted to. And I mean, I knew this was gonna happen.
Sure.
So
we have to ask you all to vote now. If you want us, what's one of those all shows, you get a thumbs up.
Right. Yeah, put it in the chat. If you want a part 2, put it in the chat. If you say no, this is enough, put that in the chat. And
Rev Susan says, what's the name of the bill you said? Momnibus?
Momnibus. And actually,
Momnibus.
yes. And yes, let's put up the last few slides and start putting some links in the chat that will help move us to what we're going to be doing in the new year. So this is the first of 4 webinars that we're going to have. And we're looking at all aspects of early childhood development, how to equip faith leaders to be able to advocate, to organize, to mobilize, supporting early childhood development. We have a lot of stuff that's coming through. So next steps, if you scan this link that's on the screen, and it'll be put in the chat as well. This talks about all of our early childhood development work, ECD, early childhood development. We have had a campaign about flourishing futures, where our organizer has, Lauren Morrissey, who was in the chat, has created a whole campaign dealing with embracing young children. Very funny. So that's the chat. That's just for the general ECD work. Next slide, because I can't remember what I did next. So that one talks about, so that was all of our ECD work, that previous link. To join the campaign, that first QR code, that's how you can join the campaign and learn more about advocating, sending stuff to Congress, trying to put pressure on them. Next is that another slide is take our childhood development. Nope, go back. The other QR code is our early childhood development survey that's going to guide our program. So we're doing a participant action research. So we're doing some focus groups, and Rev, that's something I need to talk to you about, because we want to do a local focus group, talking to parents about what we can do to help. And so that's another thing. We're gathering data to give you guys the tools to be able to make a difference in your communities. Also, a toolkit is coming. So we got a lot of stuff coming. So these slides right here, and then the next slide. And last but not least, everything goes back to civic engagement. If you are worried about this next election and people's votes being counted, please scan here and sign up to learn more about our poll chaplain initiative and the Faith United to Save Democracy program. We are recruiting poll chaplains, lay and clergy in the 10 key steps. Yes, there will be a follow-up email with all these links. Reverend Newton, thank you so much for coming and keeping me on track. She's gonna get me later, but yes, please sign up. That link is in the chat, and you will be getting a evaluation email. Please fill out the evaluation. It helps us to do an even better job next time. So it is 7 o'clock on the dot on my Swatch watch.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Cool. Thank y'all so much. We'll see y'all next time, and we might do a part 2. Peace. Like, I'm gonna make this.
You play that Bob James now, they go.
Look, I can do this too.
Oh my God. What is that, like some AI stuff?
Yes, it's Apple AI stuff.
Oh my God.